See applied behavior analysis in a different and refreshing light here at the Skinner Report. Hosted by Sara Litvak and Anna Bullard. They shed light on what ABA therapy organizations need to know to level up their behavioral health services, helping every individual with autism meet their maximum potential. Join information-filled episodes with leading industry experts as they discuss every issue and update in the ABA scene, giving you an idea of what you can do to become a quality ABA organization and support the building of inclusive and comfortable workplaces in this side of the healthcare world. Here are your hosts, Sara and Anna.
All right, Anna, it's episode 3 of the Skinner Report, and today we're talking about so many fun things. We're going to talk about CEO turnover, some central reach downtime and the impact it has, and we're also going to give a quick conference recap. So let's dive in.
So exciting. Sara, before we dive in, I thought we could give a shout out. This week was International Women's Day. So shout out to all of the women out there working hard, taking care of their families, and just doing all the things that we do. I know for me, it was International Women's Day was literally a day where I worked, cleaned my house, went and picked up my grandson, decorated for Easter so it would be perfect for him, and then, went to bed at midnight.
Don't even get me started. I feel like every day should be International Women's Day.
So true. So true. And you have a 2-year-old. And so how is that with balancing all of that with being a CEO and a mom and everything that you do?
Oh man, it's tough. It's so funny. I have so many providers reach out to me that are female founders who text me and say, I just had a kid. Like, what do we, like, I'm not even kidding. I've had in the last month, 3 providers who just had babies reach out to me being like, how do you do this? And I'm like, no one's doing it. You're just figuring it out.
Right. I think that's the key. Like you can't, it seems cliche to say, don't be hard on yourself. But it's really not, because I think that really is the key is don't be so hard on yourself. I mean, you're going to have days where, you feel like you're terrible. You feel like you're on top of the world. And then there's just, some days where I feel like I'm the only person in my house who knows where anything is. And so, it's fun.
Yeah. I feel the same way. Also, while we're at it, significant events right now, if you haven't heard, there's a very sad thing going on right now in Ukraine. And I don't know if you know this, I speak Russian, and my dad's side of my dad is from Odessa, Ukraine. So I'm actually part Ukrainian. My mom is from a different part of what was the USSR. And it's just been so sad to watch. So for those of you who are somehow impacted, who have family out there, it's been really just a tough week listening to all that going on. I don't know. How have you been hearing about it, Anna, in your neck of the woods?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is coming through on, different social media platforms that I follow, different, specific journalists that I follow that I really feel like, provide good reporting. But it is, I actually was going to ask you, because I knew you were Russian, but I wasn't sure what part and where you were from. And I mean, do you have any thoughts for us? I mean, other than just, sending, prayers. And I saw that you posted something about how we could financially help them. And,
yeah, it's funny. I have been someone who can speak the language, who's been following the more local news.
Okay.
I'm I don't even know how to help, but I've heard about this trick that I've heard people doing, which is you can book a room, an Airbnb, in Odessa or in Ukraine, and basically cancel the room. So you don't actually go, but you just send them money. So I did that to a couple of places, and that's felt really good. But aside from that, it's really hard to figure out what to do. So, but yeah, thanks. Not to be a downer. I was just thinking International Women's Day, current events.
It's right. It's so important, right? I mean, I think all of these things are shaping kind of how, it was interesting. And so I'll go off on one more tangent. Okay. Then we'll get back to what's on our agenda. But so for those of you listening, Sara sends frequently throughout the week something that's just encouraging in our all staff Slack channel. That's our, what we use to communicate. And this week it was, this kindergarten group that put together like a hotline.
Yes, I love that story. It's so sweet.
It's so sweet. And it's on NPR, and we'll have to share the link, when on the podcast. But, it's, to me, I just thought when the journalist started talking, he was just saying, there's so much going on, and we have to just stop and realize, it's really a lot, and it affects your day-to-day life. And
100%.
yeah, so I think people are dealing with a lot. I mean, I feel super grateful. We're certainly not dealing with a lot of the things that, those are in countries that are at war. But, I think everybody is just dealing with a lot of things right now, and just the impact.
And it's okay to not be okay too. I think
That's
there's
right.
this idea that like you're constantly having to be okay. And, there's no telling what will impact you day in and day out. So the first thing we wanted to talk about today was this idea of, we spent our last podcast talking about turnover. We talked about technicians and BCBAs and clinical directors. And what we failed to talk about was this idea of CEO turnover. And it's something, or executive turnover, that really we don't talk about too much. I mean, we know that turnover is an issue with our direct care staff because there's a labor shortage. But it's important to note that there has, in the last 6 months, been a high volume of CEO turnover. 5 of the largest ABA organizations had their CEOs leave for one reason or another, and then some have been replaced. Others have had interim CEOs. And so it just made sense to talk about it because, again, this is where we talk about the things that no one else is talking about. CEOs are getting removed from their role, either willfully or not. And I think that has a lot of implications for our field. So I guess I'll just pose the question to you, Anna. What has your experience been with executive turnover? And what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it is I think it certainly has an impact on any organization. I had an experience with a CEO turnover, and in my case, it was pretty abrupt. It was, just a quick shift with that CEO wanting to, make a change and do something else. And they brought someone new in fairly quickly. And, there was leadership style differences, and there's a lot to get used to, a lot to adjust to within that. And so, for our leadership team, we had to, I would say, make a pretty quick adjustment to just how things were different, which is not a bad thing. It's just an adjustment, right? And so when you're running an ABA company, whatever position you're in on a leadership level, I'm sure there's so many people, if you're listening, you can't stop for a moment, right? So when you're dealing with those kinds of significant changes in leadership, it does take time, and that can slow things down in other areas when you're working to ensure that all of those kids get the hours that they need, and that your authorizations don't expire and your billing is going out. So yeah, I would say for us, it was the fact that it was quick, I think, that made it a little bit more challenging, for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's definitely some challenges with what I would say like a quick exit, just because I think no one sees that coming usually except the person involved in it. And, it's interesting. I have a lot of opinions on how to exit executives appropriately. And I think, unfortunately, if you've been in the CEO role or an executive role, you've had to make really tough decisions in terms of how to hire and, how to fire, unfortunately. And I think that it's more of an art form, really, because ultimately, it's never an easy decision. And as a CEO, you have kind of a fiduciary responsibility to your, to your board and to the organization, right? To the people that work for you too, to make sure that the company remains viable. If you're in a nonprofit, you have the fiduciary responsibility to your sponsors or your donors or your board. And so, you're constantly having to think about the big picture as opposed to the individual sometimes. But I think that, in the different roles that I've had, I've definitely felt like there's some ways to exit executives that just really leaves you feeling like you have a bad taste in your mouth, right? It's never an easy decision, but I think there's ways to do it where you can sleep better at night. And I think that it's usually harder on you as a CEO to exit people in that way. So yeah, I think a quick exit is tough for everyone. And I think there's smoother ways to do it.
Yeah. I mean, what have you seen done well, I guess, is my question.
So I think that typically whenever there's some type of leadership or executive change, it's typically not a surprise to most people involved in that decision, right? So whether it's a board, whether it's a CEO who's having to make a larger shift at the executive level, and it's typically not a surprise for the executive also. Ideally, if you're at that level, you're getting like regular feedback and you've had a review and you've gotten direct communication about like what may or may not be working, right? Unless there's like an egregious ethical issue or something like that.
Right.
So I think that if that you are in that position, like my recommendation would be to just have the conversation that, hey, I don't think it's working out. And I want to make sure that we can exit in a way that allows you to have the time that you need, allows us to have the time that we need, and basically put together an exit strategy with that executive where they can communicate their story essentially, right? Like their dialogue as to what's happening, and really take the time to make it smooth for everyone involved, like allow them to say goodbye to the people they work with, kind of really like pat their back on the way out, because no matter what the differences are that you have with that person, they did contribute to the organization in some way. That being said, like I will say it's really hard to do that sometimes, especially when you have just philosophical differences. But I do think that we spend so much time thinking about onboarding, and it's just as important to think about offboarding in the exact same way, delicate way, right? Because ultimately that's the last perspective that person is going to have about you and your organization. You want them to leave, with a really positive taste in their mouth. And I think at BHCOE, I know, we certainly have people who've gone and come over the years. And I'm really proud, like we have, BHCOE alumni that I can point back to and say, like, they worked at BHCOE at one point and we love them and it didn't work and that's okay. Yeah. And, you still see these people out and about and there's no bad blood. And I think that's really important. And if that person's not part of that, like alumni group, that there must have been something really wrong. Right. And I think it's really, those are people who are going to be your ambassadors after they leave your organization.
Yeah, it's so good. I really appreciate, you bringing that perspective, because I think that, when I think about successful exits, I do think that you're right. I mean, maybe there's a few people, if it is a situation where, someone's not happy, whether it's the individual who is leaving because they're not happy or the organization or board that's not happy, generally, the people on the ground that are doing the work, right? The staff that are just, really out there with our kids with autism and things, they don't know all of that stuff. And so, you want to really just keep stability too, and make sure everyone knows that, that nothing is changing for them and that they just keep doing the good work that they're doing. And I think that's very important in that whole picture. When those things are occurring. Sarah, as I've, thought about, some of the changes that have occurred over the last 6 months to a year, do you think these changes are an indication that our industry is facing difficulties beyond just the hiring turnover? I mean, I know we do a lot of reporting and data analysis on that, but what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm curious what you think too, but I think that there's a couple things that we kind of take for granted in our field, which is that we have a lot of founder CEOs. And founder CEOs typically have just a much longer tenure than non-founder CEOs. And so when you do see that uptick in CEO turnover, I think for me, I just think, well, a lot of those folks that we know are turning over are not founders. They're kind of CEOs for hire, which I think is different considering the fact that their tenure is typically a lot shorter. And then I also think, look, a lot of CEOs have been dealt a really tough hand with COVID. The last few years have really not been easy on businesses. And I think that what I would say is that typically when you enter an organization as a CEO, you kind of have this honeymoon period where you kind of have 18 months to kind of get it together. Like you come up with a 100-day
Right.
plan, you kind of onboard, you kind of get to a point where you're showcasing what you're going to accomplish. And after those 18 months, it gets real really quickly because you need to be able to showcase results, whether it's growth or quality or, marketplace initiatives that you're putting forward. And so I think that COVID just dealt a lot of CEOs a really tough hand, because even if you come in with a really strong plan, there were just some factors that were outside of their control.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that everyone was braced in 2020 for COVID. But, I feel like some organizations in states that were hit harder than others maybe saw some tougher situations. But I feel like the aftershock is what has um, really been difficult. And I'm sure for all of the leadership teams out there, the CEOs, the CFOs, COOs, and even the clinical leadership, that's been the difficult place, because we saw this, pullback from the market with being able to hire. And then you saw the, what you had to pay people increase. So you have less people that you can hire, and the cost to hire them went up.
Mm-hmm.
Without any change in reimbursement rate, right?
Well, and I also, I was just going to say, there's just been some organizations that I've really commended because they've had BCBAs or clinicians who've worked, up the ranks, who became clinical directors and regional directors and then operations. And then, I know a couple of BCBAs who, I've known for a long time, who are now CEOs of these organizations. And I think ultimately the role of running an ABA, it's a very, we talk about this a lot. It's a very people centric and people heavy business. And so you need someone in that role too, who understands the kind of the plight of the RBT and the plight of the BCBA. And so that's been really interesting to see as well, because I think it's a lot harder to learn the industry than it is to learn things like, financial reporting, right? Or right. Audits and taxes and lending and all of that. So I think that's been really interesting too, is just this idea, as a CEO, you need to talk to your people, you need to go out into the clinics, and you need to be, in the trenches to really understand that role, and it'll help you make better decisions about the business as well.
Yeah, I love that point, Sarah. I think that if I, being, someone who reported to multiple COOs within my career, and went through more changes in that position than in the CEO position. But, one thing that I think I would love to say to any leader is go out and see the clinic, go out and see how ABA is delivered. Go meet your clinicians. And even if you just, did that once a year, or even if you are just doing that as an onboarding part of your job, go out and just see how it is run in that clinic where you're serving kids, because it's not like any other healthcare service. Now, I do want to caveat that's not, it's not to say we shouldn't be held accountable. And we talk about that a lot at BHCO. We want to be treated like all other healthcare services, then we need to act like a healthcare service, right? But at the same time, ABA is unique in that it's delivered in a tiered model. That's unique.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Well, good luck to all the CEOs is what I want to say out there. We need you to do really well, because the kids need service, right? I mean, that's what I mean. I'm ultimately, as the person who's going back to always being a mom, we want everyone to be successful.
100%. 100%. All right, Anna, next up, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about an announcement we made in our last newsletter called Payor Disclosures. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means and why it matters to accredited organizations and payers?
Yeah, I'm really excited because we've been doing this, but more manually, if that's the right way to say it. So when we have providers that reach out, or we have payers that reach out, we're letting them know who the accredited providers are in their state, or, if it's a national payer, sending them a list if they ask for it. But what we're doing now is really being very deliberate about that. So every time we get a new batch of accredited providers that we're so proud of, we're sending that to all of the payers. So maybe you're not even in network with them, but you're going to be. So they would have access to know that you are an accredited provider. So I think it's going to be really exciting, so that those providers that are in network or those that are working on in network status, those payers already know that they're accredited. And our hopes are that it can help, speed up that process because you've gone through accreditation. So I think it's going to be, going to be a really good way to really start to showcase those providers.
We're going to take a quick break and be right back here to talk about our conference recap.
I didn't go to APBA this year. We have obviously a lot going on at BHCOE, and so yeah, I would just love to hear how it went. It was in a fun city, New Orleans. I'm sure that was fun, but who'd you see, and kind of what were the hot topics that you felt like everyone really was interested in while you were there?
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know APBA, it's the Association for Professional Behavior Analysts. And they are kind of like the professional association that supports BCBAs once they get credentialed and kind of helps them, provide continuing education units and support and things like that. But I also consider them kind of like the lobbying arm of the BACB, because I know there's a really strong relationship between the two. And so because the BACB has limitations on what they can and can't do, I kind of look at APB as a partner there. So BACB usually has a really strong presence there. And yeah, it's always a great conference, I have to say. I will start by saying New Orleans is a great town. It was a bit of a bummer to see how quiet the conference was. It felt like a little bit lighter than most conferences, but from what I understand, that's like what's happening across most conference industries anyways. I mean, you're getting like half of the people that you normally get. But I always love the conference because they start with like a CEO directors meeting. And this year it was run by Rebecca Womack, who's at Blue Sprig. And, she spent about 45 minutes mostly talking about licensure. And it was really, really informative. But I think the one thing on my end is I had a couple providers come up to me just saying like, it seems like it's always about licensure whenever we're at those meetings. And like, we've already passed the autism mandate in all 50 states. Like licensure is happening in some, like, I wish we would have talked about like labor shortages or billing and credentialing delays or training. But like, I would say the good news out of that is it sounded like, because Rebecca's the incoming APBA president, and I don't want to say that this is exactly what was said, but it was like, I walked away thinking it was implied, is that there's a succession plan for APBA, which is currently run by Gina Green. And, as she's kind of, getting towards the retirement age, kind of figuring out like what would happen to APBA if she was no longer, in that role. And so it sounded like everyone was kind of rallying around Rebecca Womack being that succession plan for Gina. So that was really cool. And like, obviously, if you know Rebecca, she's kind of a force and just amazing. So that was really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. And yeah, I think licensure is important to BCBAs. I think it means something different to CEOs, right? Because I'm on the policy side of things a lot and hear a lot of feedback from CEOs or COOs, and they're dealing with a lot of barriers to trying to get kids access to care. And I think that is at the forefront of a lot of their concerns with what has happened with a lot of these bills that have passed creating licensure. I think licensure is important, absolutely, and improving quality and ensuring, that there's states know who's practicing and things like that. But I recently, as you know, Sarah, was just at the Capitol yesterday about, House Bill 412 in Georgia. And, we had some great discussion right before the Senate hearing. And I think it's just going to be critical. How are we ensuring that we're not adding an additional 90 days on to an already huge delay in credentialing right now? So I thought it was a really meaningful discussion. And I think potentially there's an opportunity to have some of these discussions where there's really big barriers like in Arizona, right? And
Yeah,
obviously New York is its own fun state. But yeah, that's interesting that was, kind of the topic. I do think it's a valuable topic to BCBAs.
agreed. The other thing was, so the opening key in this, like that CEO directors meeting is usually like the evening before. And then the next morning, I did attend the opening keynote, which was on substance abuse. And that was really interesting just because the majority of clinicians aren't really working in that field, but it was really cool to see that there is someone working in that field, and that, that was something that APBA was choosing to highlight. There was a presentation on value-based care, and it was led by Central Reach, and that was really interesting. But I will say, there was definitely some buzz about the Central Reach situation. And if you're not familiar with Central Reach, they're like a pretty popular EMR. And so, they had a shortage in February, or kind of an outage, I'd say. And it lasted about a week's worth of time, so like 5 business days, where basically you would be like intermittently kicked out of the app, or everything was really slow, or there was like a pretty big loss of data. And then it happened again about 2 to 3 weeks later. And I know Central Reach is largely working to kind of, correct some of these things. And it sounds like some of the issues were resolved, but a lot of providers were talking about that, especially because as you walk through the vendor space, you just see like so many more EMR vendors than ever before. Like it used to just be like, therapy brands or like, Acupoint and Code Metro and Central Reach, and that's it. And now it was like every other booth was an electronic medical record or like practice management software. So the Central Reach thing was definitely a point of conversation, and just the implications of just like the revenue loss. Some people kind of said like, there wasn't true revenue loss, because even though we, pay our RBTs or technicians and supervisors to fill out notes, we just had to pay them at a later date to do it. But others were like, no, we just couldn't even figure out what to bill. So we just decided not to bill because that was confusing. So
wow,
I thought that was an interesting thing that is still lingering even a couple months later.
Yeah. I mean, we got a lot of messages about that, right? Just, can we get a hotline in to somebody? I know BACOE was being bombarded with like, do you guys know anybody that we don't know that we can contact at Central Reach? So I do think it was a challenge, certainly. So how was their, Sara, the value-based pay presentation? Was it more about how their platform is being prepared for that?
Yeah. And I have to be full disclosure. Micah, one of our director of accreditation, was there through the entire presentation. I had to jump out for a phone call during part of it, so I don't want to speak ill-informed about it. But from what I understood, they were kind of showcasing a lot of the like more granular data that they collect at the Central Reach side. And I don't think it was really focused on value-based care per se, but more of the readiness piece. So like, how can you make sure that you're collecting the right data? And, at the same time that there were so many great conversations happening, like at the same time of that presentation, there was a conversation around school-based services and quality with school-based services. And like Scott Page, one of our clinical evaluators, attended that one. And he actually sent our team that Virginia has like a whole ethics code specifically for school-based behavior analysts, which I remember hearing about, but he sent like the actual code. And I was like, this is incredible. And just really cool to see that type of information being disseminated, and just thinking about how much the setting makes it different in the way we provide care.
Yeah, that's so interesting. School-based service has been a pretty big topic. I'm going to say Colorado. They have a piece of legislation right now to really help ensure kids can access service in the school setting. And it's been a hot topic that I think that is very important. Kids spend a lot of time in school. Some states are much more open to allowing that. Some payers are more open. I know Florida also had some legislation because they had this odd policy that the school districts interpreted to in a way that would say RBTs could not work in the school. So they were working on some legislation to kind of remove that. But yeah, I think that's such an important conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think parallel to that, there was some conversation around licensure and certification. I ended up skipping that one just because I felt like I got a good dose of licensure issues at that CEO and directors meeting. But the cool part was like there was a whole presentation at APBA about the importance of accreditation, which was like to me, like preach. I was so excited. I mean, we've been talking about BHCOE up here at BHC. We've been talking about the importance of accreditation for years. And so it was really validating to have a whole session on the importance of accreditation. And it coming from someone who isn't us, which I think again is like just very validating that we've been marching in the right direction and that it's something that the field is finally kind of rallying around. So that was awesome. And then I have to brag about my team for a second, Anna, because I mean, it's your team too, but like, so our evaluators presented this year on some of the longitudinal data that they've been collecting over the last, I don't know what, like how many years. And the people that were involved in that. So obviously Dr. Kazemi, who's our chief science officer, really kind of was the chair and she really led that conversation and kind of coached the team. But this is a presentation that we've like largely done in the past in different capacities. And, you know, it's really evolved as our data set's gotten bigger. But Nikki Williams, who's one of our most senior clinical evaluators, she's been with us since BHCOE started pretty much. She started her PhD program when BHCOE started, you know, when she started working for us and is now a PhD, if that gives you any context of tenure. But she kind of started with kind of exploring indicators of a healthy business and how do you really define high quality ABA. And then after that, Micah went, and Micah's our director of accreditation, and he talked a little bit about patient and guardian satisfaction, which was really awesome. I mean, the funny part about Micah is he's like a preacher's kid. So whenever he gives these presentations, he's just like very inspirational. And so people started clapping in the middle of his presentation, which I thought was awesome. So Micah was really focusing on compassionate care and this concept of behavioral artistry and kind of the idea that, you know, some of the characteristics you associate with behavior analysis is not like warmth and sensitivity and sense of humor and humility, but those are the type of things that we need to see for parents to really be happy. And so I think that was just really, really meaningful to a lot of the people who do that within their practice. And then Melissa Cotton Jim presented on predicting employee satisfaction. And then Scott Page took it home with some presentation on organizational outcome data. So I was just like super blown away by them. I mean, I knew the data that we were collecting and I knew the impact of it, but they just did an incredible job. And I was really proud to see them be able to present like years of the work that we've been doing.
Wow. Sarah, I would love, that made me think of a conversation you and I had, and I'd like to pivot just a second to talk about this. Yeah. You know, I think we've all kind of been in this experience with, do you bring your employees back to the office? Do you let them work from home? Do you go to conferences? Do you have in-person meetings? You know, what is the impact of that? Does it really make a difference? And I've been reading a lot and listening to podcasts myself. Brene Brown has done a lot of talks about that too. And you had some really unique perspectives that I think is worth sharing with everyone, because I think everyone is asking that question right now. Yeah. With connection.
I would say like a resounding, I think this is what it is. When we like talk to our team members, everyone's like, I don't want to go in the office every day. Like, I think we can all agree there's some convenience around not going into the office. But I think the amount of conversations we were able to have within our team and like the connection you feel when you're together in person is just really hard to overcome virtually. Like, it's just, you can't connect in that way virtually. And then just like seeing, you know, the people around you. Like, I mean, I saw so many colleagues that I haven't seen in forever. And like, you can have sidebar conversations, you can have like real conversations, you know, sometimes on Zoom, you like get on and you're there to just talk about one thing and getting the work done, and you lose the human element. So I think I walked away thinking, gosh, we need to do this more often. And we need to make time. I mean, we already meet, I think, a fair amount in person as a team, but I think we need to really make time for it as an organization, because there's just so much information that you lose on the virtual side.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think there's some real good data coming out about that, you know, because I think companies are really seeing the impact when you don't have that connection, and that relational connection. And, you know, I know for me, it was definitely a challenge starting when I first started working for BHCOE. It was literally during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it was so incredible getting to actually meet everyone for the first time. And it just gives you this sense of trust that you have when you're with people in person. So I wanted to sidebar on that, because I think in many situations, if you're asking yourself, does it matter if we're in person or not? Does it matter if I go see, the BCBAs that I'm, working with, or, all that kind of stuff? I think it does.
Yeah.
I think it does matter. And to your point, I think you can do a lot of the daily grind at home and things like that. But I think there's really something to connecting that is important.
100%. Michelle Trevetti, who's on our ANSI commission, and I don't know if you know her, Anna, but she passed the autism mandate in Indiana,
Right.
and she's a parent. So she was at the convention, and it's like, she and I can email or text, or, we connect in other ways, but I was able to go up to her and like give her a hug and be like, thank you so much for all your hard work. Our ANSI standards are just going through their next round of public comment. Like, thank you for all your revisions, right? Like no matter how much you email or text, you just can't communicate some of those things, virtually. Also cool to see Charna Mintz, who's the outgoing president of APBA from Action Behavior Center. And,
Oh, wow.
Jim Carr was there from the BACB. I didn't get to go to any of their sessions, but I imagine it was a nice update on kind of where the sort of where the field is moving towards.
Right.
But yeah, I saw behavior, but I mean, it's just, you see all the people that you're used to seeing at the conferences. So I had a great time, and, I really hope that we have more people coming next year.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, you kind of have to pick and choose, right? I mean, that was kind of where I was like, oh God. But I know we had a lot of great feedback, that so many people had such a great time. So what's next? I think CASP has their conference coming up.
Yes. And we always co-host an event with Bolton and Company during that conference. We've been doing that for the last 5 years. So I'm excited to do that again this year. The Autism Investor Summit is in 2 weeks. So I'm
so excited about that.
So excited about that. And then Dr. Kazemi Ellie is presenting at TechSaba. So that is coming up. I believe it's April 20. Let me just pull up these dates so that I can actually
pull up the dates. Yeah.
Let's pull up the dates.
And while you're pulling up the dates, I will say one of my really great friends and colleagues in the field, Jen Godwin, she raves about TechSaba.
Oh yeah. I've always wanted to go, and I'm so bummed because it's actually during my daughter's spring break, and the Autism Investor Summit is the 18th through 20th of April. And TechSaba is the 21st to the 24th. And I promised myself I would, as soon as the summit is done, because you know how it is planning a conference, I'm like going to take those 4 days off, but Ellie will be there presenting, which is awesome. And there's a Four Corners ABA conference, April 8th through 9th. So that's a little bit earlier. And then Virginia ABA is the 29th through 30th. CASP is the 2nd through 3rd of May. And then you get into like the Mass ABA and ABAI convention, which I feel like are the kind of big ones in May. So it's going to be a nice time, nice like time to see people. And the sun is out, it's spring, I'm wearing a sundress. I feel like I haven't done that in a while.
I know.
But if you're listening to this, and like Anna and I would just love to know, is this the sort of stuff that you guys want updates about? Do you guys want to hear what's going on at the conference circuit? Is this of interest to you? We have an email address specifically for any type of podcast feedback. So it's TSR, which stands for the Skinner Report, tsr@bhcoe.org. So email us, let us know if this was helpful. If you have not been able to go to a conference, but want us to recap these, we will do it. So just let us know.
Yeah.
That's it for today's episode of The Skinner Report. By allowing yourself to be inspired and educated through this podcast, you are now one step closer to growing, building, or starting your own ABA practice that can impact the behavioral landscape. Continue nourishing your heart and mind right here by listening to more of our episodes at bhcoe.org. Be sure to subscribe to the show and leave a positive rating. Let us make the ABA scene safer, more caring, and more connected than ever before. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.